So last night was quite an experience for me. I'd even go as far as to say it was downright terrifying. It's definitely the only time in my life where I felt so on edge, like my life was in danger. Here's what went down. I was out driving around at around 1 a.m. with my buddies Jake and Will. We were just cruising, trying to find a good spot to chill and smoke. Earlier in the night, we had been hanging out at my place, gaming and indulging in junk food. Eventually, Will offered to take us to Walmart to grab some more snacks, and on the way back, we met up with his dealer and snagged a few pre-rolled joints. So there we were, driving around the outskirts of town for about 10 minutes, when Jake suggests this parking garage near an apartment complex close to the subway a few miles away. He said it was usually empty and supposedly not monitored by security. Jake took the lead, with Will and me following closely behind as we parked outside the apartment building. We hopped out of the car and headed towards the parking garage. It loomed about 4 stories tall, nestled right next to the freeway, which also ran over the subway, adding to the noise pollution in the area. As we approached, we could barely make out any cars inside. Before proceeding, we made Jake swear that there was no security patrolling the area. He insisted he frequented the place at night for skating sessions and assured us it was always deserted. Convinced, we hopped over the gate at the entrance and decided to make our way up to the top level for a better view. The air inside the garage was bone-chillingly cold. While the first floor was almost packed with cars, the further up we went, the emptier it became. By the time we reached the 3rd floor, there wasn't a single car in sight, let alone on the 4th floor. Finally, we reached the top and settled in to admire the view, passing around a joint. Everything seemed to be going smoothly, and I started to unwind a bit, when suddenly we were startled by a loud metallic crash echoing from the stairwell. We all stood frozen for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest as we listened intently for any further sounds, but there was nothing but silence. After a few tense minutes, we debated whether to continue smoking, but Jake and I couldn't agree. It felt too risky if there was someone else lurking in the garage. I suggested we could just head back to my backyard or find another spot, but eventually we managed to convince Will to pack everything up and start making our way back down the stairwell. We had barely descended to probably just past the 3rd floor when suddenly another metallic crash from above us sent shivers down our spines, halting us in our tracks once again. But as before, the noise ceased as soon as we stopped, leaving only the eerie howl of the wind and the distant hum of the freeway. "What the?" Jake muttered, his voice trailing off into uncertainty. I could feel the tension mounting, and I'll admit, I was starting to freak out a bit myself. Those crashes were so loud, and I couldn't even begin to fathom what could be causing them. Just as we were about to press on, a sound pierced through the air, sending a chill down my spine. It was a man's voice, seemingly coming from somewhere above us. We all instinctively looked up, and what we saw felt like something straight out of a horror movie. There, about 4 flights up from where we stood, a man was peering over the banister of the staircase. He had this eerie, terrifying white guy fox mask on, and his gaze was fixed right on us. Jake wasted no time urging us to pick up the pace. Will, who was leading the way, began speed walking down the stairs, and I followed closely behind. But suddenly, the sound of whoever that person was sprinting down the stairs above us sent a jolt of panic through us, causing us to break into a run. As we started running, I could have sworn I heard another person below us running up the stairs. Apparently, Will had picked up on it too, because he turned around and started screaming for us to make a break for the door to the 2nd floor. Without hesitation, Jake swung the door open, and we all bolted out onto the 2nd floor, running side by side. I instructed them to find a hiding spot, and we quickly huddled down behind a nearby car. My heart was pounding harder than ever before, adrenaline coursing through my veins. We listened intently as the door to the 2nd floor creaked open, followed by the sound of 2 sets of footsteps echoing on the concrete. Will nudged me and gestured towards another door across from us, indicating it might lead to a stairwell. We exchanged nervous glances, and then Will declared that we had to make a break for it. As much as I dreaded it, It seemed like our best shot at escaping whatever was happening. I couldn't be sure if those guys were security guards or something else entirely. But at that moment, it didn't really matter. We just needed to get out of there. I was terrified of getting caught by them, not knowing what their intentions might be. With a nod from Will, he took off sprinting towards the door, with Jake and me hot on his heels. As we ran, I heard one of the men shout behind us, but I didn't dare look back. I just focused on reaching the door, praying it would lead to safety. Thankfully, it opened to another stairway. Thank goodness. We raced down the stairs to the first floor and burst out through the gate we had entered. We didn't stop running until we reached Will's car, where he quickly drove us all back to my house. Once we were safely inside, we collapsed in my living room, trying to calm our racing hearts and make sense of what had just happened. After about 10 minutes, Jake and Will both decided to head home, leaving me alone to process the ordeal. I guess none of us felt like sticking around after what just went down. Honestly, I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. I highly doubt there was any legitimate security involved. Otherwise, I might have considered reporting it to the authorities or even my parents. But then again, we were technically trespassing in the first place, so that complicates things. As for those guys, I have no clue who they were or what they were doing in a deserted parking garage after midnight. And frankly, I'm not sure I want to know. But one thing's for sure. The image of that man in the mask peering over the staircase at us will probably haunt me for a long time to come.
I've always prided myself on being a rational individual, someone who doesn't easily succumb to the mysteries of the unexplained or the supernatural. However, that one pivotal night in the dimly lit parking garage shattered everything I thought I knew about the world. It was one of those moonless nights, with rain cascading relentlessly as I exited my office building. The parking garage loomed in its usual eerie silence, its flickering fluorescent lights casting unsettling shadows on the wet concrete floor. As I searched for my car keys, a growing sense of unease settled deep in my gut. I typically parked on level 7, quieter and less crowded than the lower floors, where I had grown accustomed to the solitude. But as I made my way towards my spot, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, as if something ominous lurked just beyond the reach of my peripheral vision. I made it to my car, unlocked the door, and slid inside. But as I turned the key in the ignition, a strange noise reverberated through the garage. It was a soft, haunting melody that seemed to seep from every corner all at once. My heart skipped a beat as I strained to locate the source of the sound. The music continued, growing louder and more dissonant, filling the garage with an eerie, otherworldly ambiance. It felt as if the very walls themselves were vibrating with an unnatural energy. Panic surged within me, but I tried to push aside the eerie sensation crawling over my skin. Desperate for answers, I stepped out of my car and followed the haunting melody. It drew me deeper into the parking garage, through a maze of concrete columns and twisted winding ramps. Though the rain had stopped, the ground remained slick with water, and the echoes of my footsteps filled the air like ghostly whispers as I descended to level 8. With each step, the music grew louder and more unsettling. The music playing wasn't familiar. It was a discordant blend of dissonant notes and eerie, otherworldly sounds. It resonated deep within me, sending shivers down my spine that I couldn't shake off. Despite my faltering steps, I couldn't resist the pull to move forward. With each step, the surroundings grew increasingly surreal. The lights flickered erratically, casting eerie shadows that danced in macabre patterns on the walls. The air grew colder, and I could see my breath fogging up as I exhaled. The garage seemed to stretch on endlessly, its depths resembling an inky abyss. And then, amidst the swirling mist, I spotted her. A woman standing in the distance, her silhouette barely visible. Her presence only added to the surreal atmosphere of the place. She was draped in a tattered white gown, clinging to her emaciated frame, her long, matted hair veiling her face as she swayed to the haunting music. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice trembling with fear. Slowly the woman turned her head, her hair parting to reveal a face as pale as death itself. Her eyes were empty, devoid of life, and her lips moved as if whispering words too faint to hear. As the music reached its crescendo, I felt a malevolent presence closing in around me, something ancient and sinister. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I had to escape this nightmare, and fast. I bolted back up the ramp, leaving the haunting music behind me. But the garage seemed to morph and twist, the path altering like a maze. Panic engulfed me as I realized I was lost in this surreal nightmare. I stumbled upon level 9, but it bore no resemblance to the garage I entered. The walls were adorned with pulsating, fleshy masses, oozing a sickly, luminescent fluid. The air was thick with a nauseating stench, causing me to gag. Then, her voice echoed once more, the woman from before. She was right behind me, her whisper chilling me to the bone. "Stay with me," she pleaded. I turned to see her ghostly figure reaching out towards me, her skeletal fingers just inches from my face. The walls closed in around me, the pulsating masses throbbing in sync with the haunting music. I found myself unable to break free from the grips of the nightmare. With one final desperate scream, I jolted awake in my own bed, soaked in sweat. It had all been a terrifying ordeal, a surreal journey through a parking garage that defied all logic and reason. Even as I lay there, my heart still racing and my body trembling, I couldn't shake off the lingering sense of dread. I couldn't help but wonder if it had all just been a dream. The memory of that haunting music, the woman's vacant gaze, and the nightmarish descent into the abyss of the parking garage continued to plague my thoughts. Deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister lurked in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered in the depths of that eerie place.
After stumbling upon a post earlier today, I felt inspired to share one of my own stories. Having traveled extensively throughout the US, I've encountered some truly bizarre situations along the way. On 2 separate occasions, I found myself on the brink of what felt like entering the nightmare of a lifetime. The first story takes place while camping about an hour away from Santa Fe on a cold weeknight. I was preparing to leave early the next morning for Texas with snow forecasted. Being the young adventurer that I am, I decided to sleep in my Jeep to avoid the chill of the night. In the dead of night, an SUV skidded to a stop across the gravel into my campground, jolting me awake and putting me on edge. The SUV was blasting mariachi music, an incredibly odd sight. I assumed the occupants were either drunk or high. However, things took a terrifying turn when the doors swung open, and the people inside started running through the woods, screaming bloody murder. Their cries sent shivers down my spine, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. I found myself completely at a loss, with everything suddenly falling silent after maybe a minute or two. The absence of sound only heightened my anxiety as I lay tucked into my sleeping bag in the back of my Jeep. Cramped and terrified, I wished and prayed for the unknown voices to vanish into thin air. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, and I dared not glance at my phone for fear of what I might see. Eventually, I heard quiet voices murmuring around my Jeep and my heart sank. The only snippet I caught was, "Do you think someone's in there?" At that moment, I completely lost my composure. I screamed and scrambled as fast as I could to the front seat, where I fumbled to turn on the lights and start the engine. As I looked up, I saw figures scattering away like roaches, disappearing into the trees and down the mountainside. Since that chilling encounter, I've made it a habit to keep a J-frame revolver in the middle console whenever I travel. With my state permit recognized in many places, it's a small comfort to have in case of emergencies. Now, on to the second story, which takes place in the city of Little Rock, Arkansas. I was making my way from the East Coast to Oklahoma to visit family for Christmas. Being thrifty, I opted not to spring for a hotel and instead pulled off the I-40, parking behind a hotel to catch some shut-eye in my Jeep. It was the middle of the night when I was jolted awake by the sound of scraping noises. Confused and alarmed, I opened my eyes to see a figure outside, trying to unzip my soft top. Frozen with horror, I sat there paralyzed. It wasn't until the intruder managed to stick their hand through the small opening they created that I snapped into action. Without a second thought, I grabbed the nearest object, a Coleman lantern, and swung it, smashing their hand. Without waiting to see the outcome, I leaped into the front seat, started the ignition, and peeled out of the hotel parking lot faster than I ever thought possible. I didn't stop for gas, red lights, or even breakfast. I merged straight onto the I-40 and kept driving west for almost 30 miles. Needless to say, that harrowing experience marked the last time I ever slept in my Jeep.